You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. How do you store a ton of data in a very small package for 250 years? I don't know, copy it onto a flash drive, record it onto a voice message, or heaven forbid, write it down in really tiny handwriting on a piece of paper? That's a question that the Library of Congress considered when it put together a time capsule meant to be opened in the year 2251. We don't know what the world will look like in that year, and technology like servers and USB drives might be out of date. They could go the way of the floppy disk or the CD. So, to give the time capsule the best chance of being understood by future generations, the Library of Congress turned to an archiving technology that is as old as life itself. DNA, and they did it with the help of a team from the University of Washington. Chris Takahashi is a principal investigator at the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering, and he headed up this DNA storage project. Chris, thank you so much for being on Soundside. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So this time capsule, I should say, was buried on the 4th of July in Philadelphia. But tell me about this technique of encoding data on DNA. I mean, it really sounds like science fiction. How does it work?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, it's actually fairly simple to understand. So if you have a little bit of understanding of the background, DNA is originally part of all life. It's sort of the information-bearing part of cells. It tells the cells how to basically make themselves and make new cells, right? At the sort of most basic level, DNA is just a linear string of essentially letters. Each letter represents a small molecule, but you have your A's, C's, G's, and T's. And you can essentially think of it like converting those ones and zeros into A's, C's, T's, and G's, much like you might have, written up a secret code in fourth grade or something. Of course, when you get into the details, there's a lot of math behind it and a lot of neat tricks that we have. But it, on the most basic levels, is not much different from that.
So you're basically translating A, C, T, and G. You're using that to express ones and zeros, and therefore you can code just like an unlimited number of things with that translation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can think of everything that your computer can do right now. We already sort of translate what's sort of in our lives today into ones and zeros. And so this is actually the easier of the translations, right? Going from two digits to four digits is in some sense an easier thing to do than going from a painting to a picture on your computer.
How much data are we talking about? And for this project specifically, like how many documents, books, words were you encoding? And how does the final product come out when you do that encoding?
Yeah, so we got a data set from the Library of Congress, and it's about 1.5 gigabytes of data right now. Compressed down, that's about around gigabyte. That comes out to, I believe, milligrams of DNA. It's so small that you can't even actually see it. We store it in, of course, a larger container so that we can find them. But if you were to open up the container and look inside, at most you would see maybe a speck of dust.
Is it like strands of DNA that we're talking about? And I mean, that's obviously very, very tiny.
Yeah. So we're talking about many, many strands of DNA. It turns out that while your cells are really good at making extraordinarily long sequences of DNA, technology has a harder time of making very long strands of DNA. So right now, we're limited to about 250 bases of DNA per strand. And then we just make many, 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 many copies of those strands. And then when it comes time to read, we reorder those strands so that we can, figure out what order everything went in. And that's where we get our data.
How are you actually writing it on the DNA? Like, I can write out ones and zeros on my keyboard, but like, how do you do that with the building blocks of life?
Yeah, so that is technology that is under very active development right now. And importantly, it's technology that we originally sort of borrowed from biology. So biologists need to make synthetic genes these days. And so there's actually a large market for that. And so we can sort of piggyback on that market to borrow their technology. The interesting thing is that there's sort of a limit to what biologists need, and it's much smaller than the limit of what we need for data storage. So now what we're actually seeing is data storage researchers like ourselves and also companies are actively developing newer technologies to make larger and larger amounts of DNA. So current technologies now actually make DNA on large arrays with millions up to billions of individual spots on a chip, each one representing a unique DNA sequence.
Wow. And later, when this is uncovered, I mean, theoretically, this is going to be, dug up eventually. How are people going to read it? Like in the future, what is the goal?
Yeah, so you've hit on actually one of the really important advantages to storing data in DNA, which is that DNA is sort of an eternally relevant technology. As long as there are humans, we're going to have interest in reading it because it's part of ourselves. So if you think about trying to read a floppy disk today, right? That's maybe a 30-year-old technology. It would be difficult, right?
I'd have to break into a museum.
Yeah, and maybe the device in the museum doesn't even work. Whereas with DNA, we'll always have the ability to read it. As long as the information about how to decode it is also preserved along the DNA, then we should be able to read and then decode it thousands of years from now, even.
How did your lab end up on this project? It's a Library of Congress time capsule. It's going to be read in 250 years. It was buried in Philadelphia on July 4th. How did you at the UW get involved?
Yeah, so the library sent out a request for proposals, and in that request, they were looking to examine the frontiers of data storage. We replied to their request for proposal, and we were granted the contract.
This really project makes me think about like the gold record on Voyager, where basically you have a time capsule of sorts traveling through space, in this case, rather than time. And that record includes all kinds of data and audio from Earth. It includes instructions on how to play the record. But you're basically saying that future humans will always know how to play this record of sorts because it is so fundamental to who we are.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting analogy too. So the golden record is interesting because it's a technology that we think anybody could sort of understand. Um, and this technology is probably, I can't say anything about aliens, but this is probably more suited to the ability of human beings to understand. But yeah, I think that's an apt analogy.
So, are there any more applications that we should be aware of? I'm sure time capsules are not your number one focus for your project when you're researching the frontiers of data storage and different ways to keep large amounts of data in a very small package. What are some more applications for the type of research you're doing there at the University of Washington?
Yeah, so there's a couple of applications beyond time capsules, of course. On a short time horizon, the applications are all sort of archival storage applications, things where you want a golden copy of your data that you can't lose, right? That's so important. You absolutely can't use it. You need that fourth copy beyond your tape backup. Um, Looking a little bit farther ahead, we believe that we can do molecular computing on these data sets in DNA. So presently, molecular computing is another field of science where you use molecules to do computing, like the name implies. But because the technology hasn't been available until recently to have such large amounts of DNA, it's still an open question as to whether or not we can do general computing-like tasks on the data that's already in the DNA. So, to make this a little bit more concrete, if you think about when you're writing your script for your show or maybe your term paper for school or something, you press Control F on your keyboard to search your document. I mean, imagine your document was the whole Library of Congress and you wanted to search for one word, right? It would take your computer a long time. But because we're doing this computation in molecules, you can have individual molecules searching the whole space all at once. So we think that we can do this in a faster and much more energy efficient way.
Wow. So is there a future in which we would store more kinds of data on DNA than, say, we do currently in like server farms?
Yeah, that's an interesting question too. So if you look at the rate at which we're generating data today, we being humanity, it's accelerating, especially with the recent developments in AI. And the rate at which we're creating hard disks and data storage in general is growing too, but it's not growing as fast. And so what we've actually seen in actually the last few months even is that those two lines are starting to converge and we're starting to actually run out of storage. If some of your listeners might have noticed that hard drives have started to cost a lot more money. So if we don't come up with new ways to store data, we're going to have to start throwing it away, especially for curated data sets that you think are not going to be accessed too often. This is a very good option.
Fascinating. Is there anything else you want people to know about the project and its future applications or why it might be relevant to listeners today?
I think the short-term takeaway is that you're not going to see a DNA hard drive on your computer next year, but you might start hearing about them in large data centers or in, something equivalent to the seed vault in the Arctic.
Hmm. Why do you like working on this technology, Chris? What kind of drives you to be looking in this area of, again, data storage?
Yeah, so throughout my research history, I've worked on a lot of projects, and the thing that really jumps out to me about this project is that it's really widely applicable. There's a lot of really interesting scientific questions that are fantastic and don't have very obvious uses yet. Where this one has fantastic questions and fantastic answers.
Fantastic questions, fantastic answers. That kind of sounds like what I like to do in my job, too. Chris Takahashi is a principal investigator in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering, and he worked on this project that encoded just all these historic documents from the Library of Congress onto a tiny, tiny little package of DNA that was buried in a time capsule on July 4th in Philadelphia. Chris, thank you so much for being here. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.